At the end of it, Donald Trump declared glibly, "That makes great television." He was, of course, right. Compelling roadkill television, especially for the Kremlin. But for the Ukrainian people, this is not entertainment, it is existential. In the Oval Office, the crumpled face of the Ukrainian ambassador, buried in her hands, close to tears, said it all. Trump, with the help of Vance, had set Zelenskyy a trap, and proud and bruised as he is, Zelenskyy walked right into it. Pride was not swallowed. Zelenskyy is not as cautious as Starmer or as charming and tactile as Macron. Trump accused him of gambling with World War III when it is Putin who's been rattling the nuclear sabres. It is outrageous as Trump's insistence in the good old days of 2017 that his inauguration crowd was bigger than Obama's, when it blatantly, clearly, obviously wasn't. Trump is both a bully and a fantasist, but he's also very sincere about wanting a ceasefire deal in Ukraine because it'll make him look good. This morning we ask, what now? Where does the fight leave Prime Minister Starmer after his schmooze fest with the very same man 24 hours earlier? Where does it leave Europe as leaders prepare to meet the Ukrainian president in London tomorrow and circle the wagons? Let's just dip into some of the dust up again, and it is, of course, still painful listening.
We're trying to solve a problem. Don't tell us what we're going to feel.
I'm not telling you.
Because you're in no position to dictate that.
That's
Remember
exactly
this. You're in no position to dictate what we're going to feel. We're going to feel very good.
You will feel influenced.
We're going to feel very good and very strong.
You will feel influenced.
You're right now not in a very good position. You've allowed yourself to be in a very bad position, and he happens to be right about it.
From the very beginning of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the cards right now. With us, you start having cards. Right now, you don't. You're playing cards. You're playing cards. You're gambling with the lives of millions of people. You're gambling with World War III. You're gambling with World War III.
What can one say? I think that if Zelenskyy had been in the Oval Office with a translator, although his English is perfectly good, although it was disintegrating slightly in that exchange, had there been a translator, then the steam, the heat would have been taken out of it. We might be in a very different place today. But I think what it shows is that there is real bad blood between Zelenskyy and Trump. We'll get into that in a minute. And the big question, of course, is whether this relationship can be repaired at all. My first two guests this morning on this extraordinary subject are Lionel Barber, former editor of the Financial Times, now author and broadcaster and podcaster, co-host of the Media Confidential podcast, and Lord Peter Ricketts, former permanent representative to NATO and permanent secretary for the Foreign Office under Blair and Brown. Good morning to both of you. Do you think, Lord Ricketts, that this might have been a trap set for Zelenskyy that he fell right into?
Hello, Matt. Well, I don't know. In a sense, it doesn't matter because the outcome is what we've all seen. For what it's worth, my instinct is that Trump wanted this to be a success. He likes success. He likes to come out of a meeting with a deal. There was a big, shiny deal ready to be signed on minerals. And his lead-in remarks as they sat down were quite respectful. He talked about the courage of the Ukrainian people and the courage of Zelenskyy. And there seemed to be a bit of an effort to go through the same rigmarole as had been gone through with Macron and Starmer, some respectful exchanges, almost like an old Chinese emperor sitting in his palace. People come across from distant lands bringing tributes and gifts, and the emperor bestows his goodwill. And I think if Zelenskyy had responded in the same register, with a lot of thanks and a lot of politeness and not engaging with the barbs, then it would have moved on to a signing ceremony and they'd have come out with a deal. So no, I'm not sure it was a pre-planned. I think it was a road accident rather than a setup.
Lionel Barber, the one thing that Trump really wants is that ceasefire deal. He wants a signing ceremony on the south lawn of the White House, the way that Clinton did with Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin. And even though that ended in disaster, and assassination and death, that was the moment that people remember. He wants something very similar. And what I saw in his face yesterday was the frustration that moment was being denied him by the Ukrainian president.
Well, Matt, there is a difference between a ceasefire and a durable peace settlement.
Absolutely.
And what we're seeing at the moment is Trump is all in on just getting a truce, a ceasefire. The hard work is all around what comes next. In particularly, any security guarantees that Zelenskyy and certainly the Prime Minister and Macron in France and Germany and Poland, they're all looking for an answer to the security problem. And that means, certainly in the British view, a backstop, i.e. without America's military power, if not boots on the ground, that's got to be key to the settlement, particularly as NATO membership is off the agenda. So the headline may well be, and it may be a good look, a kind of good for TV moment when Mr. Trump goes to Moscow on May 9th, for example, and stands next to Putin and says we've got a ceasefire, but that doesn't mean anything without a settlement.
But I wonder if Trump cares about that. I mean, he is very much the man of the moment. He's got geopolitical ADHD. He's quite narcissistic, and it's all about him, and it's all about, the cessation of fighting, as you say. But he doesn't really care what happens in 2 or 3 years down the line.
Well, Trump, and I've interviewed Trump in the Oval Office. I've been there where Zelenskyy was, and it is all about theater. It's about the moment. And I think Peter is right. This was set up initially as a chance to sign the deal, by the way, of still a one-sided deal in favor of America, extracting minerals from Ukraine in return for the financial package and the money that it's put in. But again, there's a big picture. You can't just be doing diplomacy at this level, trying to end a war without thinking about the peace and managing the peace.
Indeed. Peter, I mean, the deal that was on the table, as far as we know, in terms of security guarantees, basically relied on, the presence of American contractors and miners to deter the Russians from invading Ukraine again. I mean, that is a ridiculous notion when you consider that there were plenty of American businessmen and maybe not miners, but contractors in Ukraine in 2022, and it didn't exactly stop Vladimir Putin. Why would they even have thought that was possible?
Well, because they want the mining deal, and they're absolutely determined not to have the American military in anywhere near a confrontation with the Russians. And to be honest, I don't think it was ever realistic of the Brits and the French to imagine that there would be a backstop in terms of, I think it's been talked about, air power, American aircraft in the air over Ukraine. Never on the cards, I don't think. The most we could hope for, maybe it's not impossible still, is some kind of intelligence, surveillance support from outside the country. But yeah, we're going to be in a world where there'll be no US military support to a UK French-led operation.
So under those circumstances, and we've got this conference happening in London tomorrow, should the UK and France and maybe others still insist on the idea of having troops on the ground in Ukraine, or is that a trap that we might fall into?
Well, I mean, I think to broaden it out a bit, I think Starmer and Macron have a real opportunity tomorrow, having both seen Trump, to be at the lead of trying to get this European coalition of countries together to think seriously about how we operate in this world, where we can't rely on the Americans anymore, certainly not on Ukraine. I wouldn't say that NATO is yet dead, but my goodness, we are on our own in Europe on Ukraine. So what do we do? What do we do in terms of arms supplies? Is it realistic to think about a force? In my view, the most that we could offer, I think, would be something that was in the background, support training, helping with logistics, nowhere near a ceasefire line, because as Lionel says, ceasefires can break down. And they broke down in 2014. So Zelenskyy knows very well that ceasefires can be very temporary. And just to go back to what we can try and achieve with Trump, I think we've got to go on trying to get into the guy's mind that if he wants to look strong, if he wants to go down in history, wants to get the Nobel Peace Prize, just doing, a quick and dirty ceasefire fix with Putin that then breaks down isn't going to be any good for him in the view of history. And so, I don't think that battle is necessarily lost, but it can't be fought by Zelenskyy, clearly.
Lionel, I mean, Trump changes his mind almost on a daily basis. He is capricious, he is mercurial, but we also know that there are certain constants there, his vanity, his transactional nature, etc., etc. What would you say to someone like Keir Starmer? Or maybe he got it right when he was there on Thursday. How does one approach Donald Trump and not get burnt?
I think he did a good job on Thursday. It looked very good for 24 hours. Essentially, he looked good. He made Trump like him. And he also, I think, delivered a subtle warning, which was, you don't want another Afghanistan on your hands.
Yeah.
So we do need to look beyond the moment. Now, I just want to add, there is some very disturbing news out of Washington late last night, referring to what Peter was saying. The American Cyber Command, under the orders of Pete Hesketh, Defense Secretary, is now apparently withdrawing a lot of the digital asset, the cyber capacity targeted on Russia, intelligence gathering. And if they withdraw that from Ukraine, then Ukraine is even more naked in the negotiating table than we saw yesterday, which was utterly brutal.
And what about Elon Musk? I mean, there was a suggestion a couple of days ago, even before the spat, that he might withdraw his Starlink capacity for Ukrainian troops. And without Starlink, they will find it very difficult to operate.
Well, that's exactly right. Because Ukraine is so dependent on military technology. And as you say, Elon Musk, I would add, by the way, that when I saw Elon Musk in the Oval Office, he certainly wasn't wearing a suit and tie, and he was parading his son. So for that journalist, by the way, activist, Trump supporter, husband of Marjorie Greene, to be attacking Zelenskyy for not wearing a suit, I mean, that takes the biscuit.
Well, you know, there's so many things that take the biscuit, aren't there? Just finally, to both of you, you first, Peter, where do you see our relationship with the United States, our relationship with Europe, and indeed Ukraine, the future of Ukraine, by the end of this year?
Mm-hmm. Big question. Well, first of all, if I was Starmer, I think I'd drop the bridge building stuff. It's very hard to build a bridge when one side of the river is subject to earthquakes every few weeks.
Very good point.
So I think, yes, he did well in anchoring a UK-US relationship. Of course, the state visit to the King was a huge ace that he could play. But I think the key task now is to pull Europe together and to get through this year, a year when we will see the Americans pulling back from support for Ukraine, I'm pretty sure, and to try to, first of all, remove those barriers between the UK and the EU operating on defence, to work on this interesting coalition of countries that's meeting on Sunday, which goes beyond the EU, countries like Norway and Turkey and ourselves, as a sort of a coalition of the willing to do more to support Ukraine. And it won't be as good as having the Americans involved, but that's what we've got to do, and capitalize on the fact that Merz is arriving. The new German Chancellor is very much more pro-defense and pro-Ukraine. And so let's work on those and get Starmer and Macron into a kind of leadership in that role. And I think therefore shore up both the European and the American flanks of British policy, hard though that is.
Lionel, has Trump done us a favor in Europe?
He's given us a challenge. I don't think it's a favor. I agree with Peter. I mean, first of all, Starmer has to walk and chew gum at the same time. He's got to do his narrow trade deal with the United States. He's got to keep on with a decent relationship, cordial with Trump. Meanwhile, he's got to go deeper into Europe, particularly around defense. And in 1989, 1990, Europe did respond to the earthquake, the fall of the Berlin Wall, with deeper economic integration, single currency, and expanding the EU eastwards. You need to have a similar strategic move by Europe, and Britain has got to be part of that. I think it is in that sense an opening for a Britain which decided to go Brexit 9 years ago.
By the way, just a yes or no answer. Is it time to retire that phrase, the special relationship?
I would have put it in a box about 15 years ago.
Peter?
Americans have a special smile when they use that. It's never meant very much to Americans, always much more to us. It's time to bin it.
It's the crack cocaine of geopolitics for us, isn't it?